They say if you run far enough, the past stops hunting you. They lied. I traded the brutal heat of Lagos for the neon shadows of Seoul, swapping a cartel crown for a white apron. I thought I was invisible. But as Ryu Dong-Yul cornered me against the stainless steel prep counter, the heavy titanium of his black card colder than his stare, I realized the devil didn't need to see me to find me. He just needed to taste what I made. The kitchen is closed, Àlàké. His voice wrapped around me, a dark, dangerous rumble that sent heat straight to my chest. But I didn't come for the food. Welcome back to my diary, my loves, where the most dangerous men don't use guns to trap you. They use contracts, obsession, and a limitless credit card. Our runaway chef thought she escaped the underworld. Instead, she just served herself on a silver platter. Before we step into the kitchen, I need to know your survival strategy. If a billionaire mobster bought your workplace just to get to you, are you dropping a run emoji to run for your life or a wine glass emoji to stay and see what he wants? Vote in the comments right now, and let's dive into the heat. The heavy titanium card hit the stainless steel counter with a dull thud. I did not blink. My fingers tightened around the carved handle of my Damascus steel chef's knife. Across the prep table stood Ryu Dong-Yul. He wore a bespoke midnight suit that looked spun from wealth and shadows. The neon from the street caught the sharp angles of his face. I bought the building, he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He tapped a silver-ringed finger against the metal card. The owner handed me the keys 10 minutes ago. I wiped my hands on my apron, keeping my spine rigid. Back in Lagos, my father's enforcers wore their violence on their scarred faces. Dong-Yul wore his like high fashion. Congratulations on your real estate portfolio, I said. We close at midnight. The exit is behind you. He leaned in. The scent of rain, cedarwood, and cold iron were wrapped around me. His dark eyes locked onto mine, stripping away the distance between us. I do not care about the building, Àlàké. I bought the kitchen to acquire the chef. I went still. 2 years of scrubbing my identity, trading cartel blood money for a line cook's wage, all vanishing in a second. I am not on the menu. You are the only item I want. He slid the card closer, his voice dropping to a smooth whisper. Pack your knives. My car is out back. You cook for my private estate starting tonight. I don't cook for the syndicate. Take your card and get out. Before he could answer, the heavy steel doors of the kitchen kicked open. 3 men spilled into the prep area. They were local loan shark muscle in cheap leather, reeking of desperation. The lead thug smashed a cheap glass beer bottle against the steel doorframe. Dark liquid bled across the pristine white tile. Where is the boss? The thug spat in rough Korean, his eyes snapping to me. He owes us. Maybe we take the foreign cook as a down payment. God forbid. I shifted my weight, my grip tightening on the heavy cast iron skillet. These local street boys really thought they could rush me? I never got the chance. Dong-Yul moved faster than I could blink. No weapon, no warning. He grabbed the lead thug by the throat and drove his skull backward into the commercial refrigerator. The heavy steel door dented inward with a brutal crunch. The man crumpled to the floor, motionless. The remaining 2 thugs froze, their eyes dropping to the polished leather shoes of the man in the midnight suit. The kitchen fell silent. Dong-Yul adjusted his cuffs, never taking his eyes off me. They will return, he murmured, and next time they will bring guns. Stay and fight the local dogs, or get in my car and let the most dangerous man in Seoul protect what belongs to him. I stepped over the bleeding thug and followed Dong-Yul out the back door. The rain hit my face, cold and sharp. A massive armored SUV idled in the alley. His driver opened the door, head bowed. I slid into the leather interior. Dong-Yul sat beside me. The silence in the car was suffocating. We drove in silence. The neon glow of the city faded into the dark, winding roads of the mountains. He did not ask for my address. He knew I possessed no safe home tonight. My father will hunt you if he finds out, I said, testing the waters. I kept my voice flat. Dong-Yul turned his head. The streetlights caught the hard angle of his jaw. Let him try. I have enough bullets for Lagos. A shiver crawled down my spine. He was arrogant. He was lethal. And right now, he was my one shield. The SUV passed through heavy steel gates, tires crushing wet gravel. We pulled up to a modern fortress of glass and concrete carved into the mountainside. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I traded one underworld for another. Dong-Yul stepped out and offered his hand. I ignored it. I stepped onto the wet pavement on my own. A shadow of a smirk traced his lips. He led me through grand halls echoing with vast wealth. We bypassed the living quarters and stopped before a set of heavy wooden doors. He pushed them open. Light flooded the space. I stopped breathing. It was a chef's dream. Stainless steel countertops gleamed under pristine track lighting. Custom copper pots hung in perfect rows. But that was not what made my heart hammer against my ribs. I stepped closer to the primary prep station. Standard kitchen counters sit at 36 inches. I am 5'4". This counter was lowered an exact 2 inches to match my ergonomic reach. I looked at the knife block. It held imported Damascus steel, the specific brand I favored. The spice racks housed whole calabash nutmeg and dried grains of paradise, spices you could never find in a standard Seoul market. I turned to face him. The air vanished from the room. "You built this," I whispered. My voice felt tight. He stepped into the kitchen, his dark gaze pinning me in place. The scent of rain and cedar wood surrounded me. "I drew up the blueprints 3 months ago," he murmured, his presence dominating the room. 3 months? I was no random obsession. I was a calculated acquisition. He did not leave the kitchen. Instead, Dong-Yul took a seat at the edge of the marble island, watching me work. The silence between us felt heavy, thick with the unspoken reality of my confinement. I focused on the heat of the stove, searing a cut of Hanwoo beef, my hands moving with practiced rhythm. Every time I reached for the grains of paradise or the crushed chili, I felt his dark eyes tracking the movement of my wrists, the line of my throat. He was studying me, memorizing the chef he had bought. The oil popped, a tiny drop stinging my forearm. I flinched, wiping it away with a frustrated sigh. The weight of his stare was suffocating. Under my breath, I muttered a sharp string of Nigerian pidgin. "Wahala plenty for this life. Which kind monitoring spirit be this?" Dong-Yul did not blink. He leaned his elbows on the marble, his voice a smooth, dangerous drawl. "I am not a spirit, Àlàké, and my monitoring is just beginning." My knife froze against the cutting board. My heart slammed against my ribs. He understood me. He had not just bought my kitchen. He had dissected my culture, my language, my past. Before I could demand how deep his surveillance went, the heavy wooden doors crashed open. A man strode into the sanctuary of the kitchen, flanked by 2 towering enforcers. He wore a flashy maroon suit, his face twisted in an arrogant sneer. The Seoul underworld had many faces, and I recognized this one from the whispers in the alleyways. Chairman Bae, a rival who did not care about boundaries. Bae ignored Dong-Yul, his eyes dragging up and down my white chef's coat with blatant disrespect. "You missed the syndicate summit for this, Dong-Yul, playing house with foreign hired help? She looks like she belongs in the alleys." I tightened my grip on the Damascus knife, the blood rushing to my ears. I was a cartel heiress, not a street beggar. Dong-Yul moved before I could strike. He did not yell, he did not even stand up. With a chilling, fluid calmness, he reached under his tailored jacket. The heavy, terrifying slide of a metal firearm echoing off the copper pot sucked the air out of the room. Dong-Yul aimed the barrel at the center of Bae's forehead, his hand steady over the marble island. "Disrespect her again," Dong-Yul whispered, the temperature in the room dropping to absolute ice, and you will leave my estate in a bag. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. The shadows of the estate pressed in on me, heavy with the memory of the firearm Dong-Yul had leveled at Baya's head. When the silence of the massive guest wing became unbearable, I sought the only sanctuary I had left. I slipped into the kitchen without turning on the overhead lights. The glow of the moon and the distant city bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows provided enough illumination. I began to bake, letting the rhythmic motion of whisking sweet vanilla cream anchor my racing thoughts. The soft scrape of bare feet on marble broke my trance. I spun around, my whisk suspended. Dong-Yul stood in the archway. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by low-slung gray sweatpants that rested low on his hips. His chest was bare, revealing a landscape of lean muscle and faint, faded scars that told stories of a violent past. In the dim light, with his dark hair rumpled from a restless night, the terrifying syndicate boss looked devastatingly human. He stepped into the room, his gaze dropping to the bowl, then rising to meet my eyes. The space between us shrank with every silent step he took. "You are awake," he murmured, his voice thick and rough. "I find it hard to rest in a cage," I replied, keeping my tone steady despite the sudden heat rising in my chest. Dong-Yul stopped mere inches from me. The warmth radiating from his bare skin was intoxicating. He reached out, his knuckles brushing against the hand I used to grip the bowl. I froze. He dipped one long finger into the sweet cream. He did not break eye contact as he brought his hand up and tasted the frosting, his lips parting in the shadows. "You make the cage feel like a home," he whispered. His thumb reached up, brushing a stray streak of flour from my cheek. My breath caught in my throat. I was cornered against the edge of the marble island, trapped by his towering frame and the undeniable electric pool between us. I parted my lips to speak, to push him away, to remind him of the lines we could not cross. Before the words could form, a tiny, bright red dot flickered across the white fabric of my shirt. It danced upward, settling over my heart. Dong-Yul's eyes flared with pure, lethal instinct. The quiet intimacy vanished in a fraction of a second. "Get down!" he roared. He lunged forward, his heavy, muscular frame wrapping around mine. He tackled me hard to the marble floor just as the deafening shatter of reinforced glass ripped through the silent night. Glass rained over us like jagged diamonds. The deafening echo of gunfire ripped through the kitchen. Dong-Yul's heavy, muscular frame shielded mine, absorbing the brutal impact of the marble floor. Before I could process the ringing in my ears, he hoisted me to my feet. "Move!" he commanded. His hand gripped mine, pulling me through the dark corridors of the estate while the perimeter alarms shrieked. We reached a heavy steel vault door. He slammed his palm against the biometric scanner, shoving us inside before spinning the massive locking wheel. The heavy click of the deadbolt sealed us in total, suffocating silence. The safe room was cold and metallic, lit by a stark overhead glow. Dong-Yul leaned against the steel door, his bare chest heaving. Sweat gleamed across the faded scars on his skin. He looked lethal, yet his gaze was focused on my safety. His dark eyes flashed with sudden alarm. "You are bleeding!" I looked down. The oversized white shirt was torn at my shoulder, the fabric soaking in dark crimson. A stray shot of shattered glass had sliced deep during the fall. The adrenaline had masked the sting. Dong-Yul crossed the small room instantly. He pulled the metal medical kit from the wall. He did not ask for permission. His large, warm hands pushed the ruined collar of my shirt aside, exposing my bare shoulder. His hands were surprisingly gentle for a man who had just shattered a skull. He cleaned the cut, his face inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating off his bare chest. His breathing slowed, syncing with my own frantic heartbeat. "You could have stayed down," I whispered, the raw confession slipping out before I could stop it. "It would have been easier." Dong-Yul paused. His thumb brushed along my collarbone, a touch so intimate it stole the air from my lungs. I told you. His voice was a deep, rough vibration that settled heavy in my chest. I protect what is mine. No one takes you from me. He secured the bandage, his dark eyes burning into mine with an intensity that both terrified and thrilled me. He stepped back to wash his hands at the small steel sink, tossing a piece of deformed metal onto the table. The crushed bullet slug he had dug out of the plaster wall during our escape. My eyes dropped to the table. The blood drained from my face. I reached out with trembling fingers, picking up the heavy crushed metal. It was not standard ammunition. Carved deep into the base of the metal was a tiny, intricate crowned falcon. My father's crest. The Seoul underworld had not sent the shooters. The Lagos cartel had found me. The crowned falcon on that bullet meant one thing. The cartel would not stop. I had to warn my brother in Lagos. Before dawn broke, I slipped past the estate's interior guards. A burner phone I had bribed one of the kitchen maids for clutched in my trembling hand. The moment I pushed through the heavy terrace doors, the freezing rain soaked through my torn white shirt. I scrambled to the edge of the manicured gardens, hiding in the deep shadows of the stone wall to block the wind. My fingers felt numb as I punched in the international dial code. A large, warm hand clamped over mine, snatching the cheap plastic phone away. I spun around, gasping. Dong-Yul loomed over me in the pouring rain. He was fully dressed now, a heavy wool trench coat draped over his broad shoulders. The storm lashed at his dark hair, but his eyes were a terrifying, violent storm of their own. "Who are you calling?" The words ripped from his chest, low and lethal. "My men are bleeding, my glass is shattered, and you sneak out to make a call? Give it back!" I reached for the phone, but he held it high out of reach. "You don't understand what is coming for us." "Then explain it to me," he roared over the thunder. He stepped into my space, backing me against the cold, wet stone of the garden wall. "I took you in. I shielded you. And you run out here in the dark to contact the men who just tried to put a sniper round through your heart? They are not after you!" I screamed back, the frustration and terror breaking my composure. The rain plastered my hair to my face, and I shivered. "They are my father's men. If I don't stop this, they will level this entire mountain just to drag me back to Nigeria. I am trying to keep you alive." The fury in Dong-Yul's eyes vanished, replaced by a sudden, intense realization. He looked down at me, shaking, soaked to the bone, terrified for his life, not just my own. He didn't yell. He didn't demand the rest of the truth. With a heavy exhale, Dong-Yul took off his thick wool trench coat. He stepped close, wrapping the heavy, warm fabric around my shivering shoulders, engulfing me in his scent of cedarwood and rain. His large hands gripped the lapels, pulling me flush against his solid chest. "Let them come," he whispered, his lips grazing the shell of my ear, sending a sudden rush of heat straight to my core. "I will burn this city to ash before I let anyone take you away from me." For 3 days, the mountain fortress remained quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile, terrifying illusion of peace. I buried myself in the kitchen, finding rhythm in the sharp slice of my Damascus knife against the wooden chopping board. The heavy doors pushed open, but it wasn't the gods. Dong-Yul strolled in, minus his tailored jacket and tie. The sleeves of his crisp white dress shirt were rolled to the elbows, revealing the faint scars on his forearms. He carried a flat, elegant velvet box. "You cook for a king, Àlàké," he murmured, setting the buck on the marble island. "You should dress like royalty." I wiped my hands and lifted the lid. Inside lay a custom apron, spun from deep emerald silk, light as air and soft. My breath hitched. It was beautiful, a stark contrast to the violence lingering outside these walls. Before I could thank him, he picked up a spare knife, eyeing the red bell peppers I was prepping. "Teach me." I raised an eyebrow. The most feared man in Seoul wanted a cooking lesson. You rule the underworld, Dong-Yul, but in here, I am the boss. He offered a slow, devastating smirk, or yes, chef. It was a disaster. His grip was too rigid, treating the kitchen blade like a lethal weapon rather than a delicate tool. He butchered the peppers into jagged, uneven chunks. I couldn't help the genuine laugh that escaped my lips. Wahala, I teased, stepping up close beside him. You are fighting the food. Relax your hand. I reached out, covering his large hand with mine to adjust his grip. The moment my skin touched his, the humor evaporated from the room. The air in the room suddenly felt too hot to breathe. Dong-Yul dropped the knife. He turned his body toward mine, trapping me between the marble counter and his towering frame. He reached up, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. His dark eyes dropped to my lips, heavy with unspoken desire. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tilted my face up, lost in the intense gravitational pull of him. He leaned down, his breath fanning across my mouth, mere millimeters away from a kiss I was desperate to surrender to. The heavy wooden doors burst open with a violent crash. We sprang apart. His head of security, breathless and pale, strode straight to the marble island. He didn't speak. He just slammed a thick manila folder onto the counter. Glossy photographs spilled across the pristine surface. I stared down at the images. There I was, standing beside my father in Lagos, flanked by armed cartel muscle, wearing a crown of diamonds. Dong-Yul looked at the photos, then raised his eyes to meet mine. The protective warmth in his gaze was gone, replaced by absolute ice. The silence in the kitchen shattered. Dong-Yul swept his arm across the marble island, the glossy photographs scattered across the floor, mixing with the chopped red peppers. His jaw clenched tight enough to snap bone. A cartel princess, he stated. His voice lacked any of the heat from moments ago. It was absolute winter. You played the terrified cook. You let me bleed for you. Dong-Yul, listen to me, I pleaded, stepping forward. He stepped back. The space between us turned into a massive chasm. Take her to the guest wing, Gosal, he commanded his security chief. He did not look at me. Lock the doors. Do not let her out. I am not your enemy, I yelled as the guard grabbed my arm. I fought his grip, my chest tight with a blinding panic. I ran from them. I am the target. Dong-Yul turned his back. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, sealing my fate. The guest wing was a gilded cage. The room featured silk sheets, massive windows overlooking the dark mountains, and 0 exits. The heavy steel deadbolt engaged with a loud click from the outside. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The deep emerald apron felt like a cruel joke. I ripped the silk over my head and threw it across the room. Hours faded into days. Twice a day, the lock disengaged just enough for a guard to slide a silver tray onto a mahogany table. Decadent meals arrived and turned cold. Truffle risotto, seared wagyu. I ignored them all. My stomach ached, my throat felt like sandpaper, but I refused to break. Back in Lagos, my father taught me that power belonged to the person with the most endurance. If Dong-Yul thought he could lock me away and ignore my truth, he underestimated the blood in my veins. On the third evening, the deadbolt snapped open. The security chief entered, carrying another steaming silver tray. He glanced at the untouched plates stacked in the corner. Eat, the guard grunted. The boss gave an order. I stood up. I swayed for a fraction of a second, my vision swimming, but I locked my knees. I looked the massive guard dead in the eye. Take it back, I commanded. My voice felt raw, but it carried pure steel. Tell Ryu Dong-Yul, if he wants me to eat, he has to come in here, look me in the eye, and listen to the truth, or he can watch me starve. The steel door swung wide. The security chief was gone. Ryu Dong-Yul stood in the frame. He wore a dark dress shirt, the sleeves pushed up his forearms, every muscle coiled tight. He stepped inside and kicked the door shut. The lock engaged with a deafening crack. "You think a hunger strike erases the photographs?" His voice was a low, vibrating threat. "I think locking me in a cage proves you are the very monster the streets whisper about," I shouted. The room spun, my knees shook from 3 days of refusing his food, surviving on nothing but tap water and spite. But I locked my joints. I refused to collapse. Dong-Yul crossed the floor in 3 massive strides. He grabbed my upper arms. His large hands were warm and firm, anchoring me upright. We stood chest to chest. His cedarwood scent invaded my lungs, dizzying and familiar. "You lied to me," he breathed. His face hovered inches from mine. The fury in his dark eyes fought a desperate, undeniable hunger. "You stood in my kitchen wearing the bloodline of a cartel." "I wore the scars of a survivor." I pushed against his solid chest. He did not budge. The fight drained from my bones, leaving behind a raw, burning ache. "My father did not send me here to spy on you, Dong-Yul. He sold me to a rival syndicate to secure a diamond route. I was a transaction. I ran across the world to hold a chef's knife instead of a leash." The room went dead silent. His grip on my arm shifted. He slid his hands up, his palms cupping my face. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, gentle and grounding. The cold, ruthless boss vanished. The man looking down at me held a fierce, terrifying possessiveness. "You are the prey," he whispered, the truth settling deep in his chest. "They are hunting you. And by taking me, you brought the hunt to your front door," I answered, my breath hitching. His gaze dropped to my lips. The air turned heavy, charged with an electric gravity pulling us together. He leaned down, erasing the final inch between us. "I welcome the war." Before his mouth could capture mine, a mechanical shriek ripped through the walls. Blood-red strobe lights exploded through the massive windows, painting the dark room in violent crimson. The perimeter alarms. The mountain fortress was breached. The breach was a warning. A drone strike on the outer gates, loud enough to rattle the glass, but calculated to leave us breathing. It proved my father's cartel had inside help from the Seoul syndicate. To flush out the traitor who sold the estate's coordinates, Dong-Yul chose the ultimate provocation. He threw a banquet. He invited the most feared men in the city right into the heart of our fortress. And I was the bait. I stood before the gilded mirror in the master suite. The crisp white coat was gone. In its place was a floor-length crimson silk gown that clung to my curve. The slit ran high to the thigh, giving me room to move, fight, or run. Dong-Yul stepped behind me, his reflection joining mine. He wore a dark velvet tuxedo, radiating a raw, dominant power. His warm hands settled on my bare waist, sending a rush of heat down my spine. "You look like a queen," he murmured against my ear. "Stay by my side." The grand dining hall hummed with lethal energy. Dozens of syndicate leaders sat at the endless mahogany table. Their eyes tracked my every step. I was the exotic trophy on Dong-Yul's arm, the master chef commanding the kitchen, and the ultimate unspoken threat. I directed the waitstaff with sharp commands, pouring imported wine and serving delicate plates of seared wagyu. I approached the head of the table where Dong-Yul sat beside a few high-ranking bosses. The air felt thick with tension. I picked up a crystal decanter to pour a glass for the man seated to Dong-Yul's right. As the man reached for his glass, the heavy chandelier light caught a flash of metal on his hand. My breath caught in my throat. The crystal decanter slipped in my grip. Resting on the Korean boss's thick index finger was a massive gold signet ring. It was not local craftsmanship. It featured a carved, crowned falcon with a chipped diamond eye. My father's ring. The specific seal he used to mark his diamond routes in Lagos. The trader was not just a business partner. The man sitting at Dong-Yul's table was the monster who bought me. The crystal decanter clinked hard against the rim of his glass. A splash of dark red wine stained the pristine tablecloth. The man with the falcon ring looked up. His eyes, cold and hollow, locked onto mine. A slow, terrifying smile stretched across his face. He knew who I was. He had been waiting for this moment. "Careful, chef," he rasped, his voice cutting through the low hum of the dining hall. He reached into his tailored pocket and withdrew a small silver vial. With a flick of his thumb, he emptied a fine white powder into the wine I had just poured. He swirled the glass, the liquid turning cloudy before settling back into a deep crimson. He pushed the crystal goblet across the mahogany wood, stopping it right at the edge of the table. "In my territory, it is customary for the host's prized possession to take the first taste," he commanded, tapping the gold signet ring against the glass. The sound echoed through the silence. "Drink. Prove your loyalty to the syndicate." The entire ballroom went dead quiet. Dozens of underworld leaders turned their attention to the head table. The air grew so thick it felt hard to breathe. If I refused, I insulted a high-ranking boss in front of the city's most dangerous men. If I drank, whatever he had poured into that glass would stop my heart before I hit the floor. I stared at the wine, my fingers curled into the silk of my crimson gown. Before I could reach for the stem, a large, warm hand clamped around my wrist. Dong-Yul stepped in front of me, shielding my body with his towering frame. The soft velvet of his tuxedo brushed against my bare shoulder. He did not look at the poisoned drink. His dark, lethal gaze was fixed on the gold falcon ring resting on the older man's finger. "She does not drink on command," Dong-Yul stated. His voice was a low, vibrating threat that commanded the attention of every soul in the room. "It is a simple request, Dong-Yul," the traitor sneered, leaning back in his chair. "Unless your beautiful cook has something to hide from the rest of us." Dong-Yul reached out. He did not grab the wine glass. He grabbed the thick edge of the heavy mahogany table. The muscles in his back coiled tight beneath his tuxedo. His eyes blazed with a terrifying, absolute fury. "She hides nothing from me," Dong-Yul roared. With a brutal surge of power, he heaved upward. The heavy table hit the floor like a bomb. Crystals shattered, plates exploded, and the poisoned wine splashed across the traitor's suit. The ballroom erupted into instant, deafening chaos as a dozen weapons cleared their holsters. War had just begun. Dong-Yul grabbed my hand, his grip an iron vice, and pulled me through the chaotic ballroom. Bullets shattered the crystal chandeliers above us, raining glass down like a violent storm. I kicked off my heels, my bare feet hitting the marble as we sprinted. We did not run for the main exit. We headed for the double swinging doors. My domain, the hotel kitchens. We burst through the metal doors, the prep staff scattered in terror. 3 of the traitor's men charged in right behind us, weapons drawn. Dong-Yul shoved me behind a massive stainless steel island, returning fire with the weapon he pulled from his tuxedo jacket. The deafening roar of gunfire in the enclosed tile space made my ears ring. I refused to cower on the floor while he fought my battles. I scanned the industrial counters. A massive vat of deep-fried oil bubbled at maximum heat. Beside it, a heavy cast-iron skillet rested on a burner. "Wahala for who no fear, woman," I muttered, the pigeon slipping from my lips. I grabbed the handle of the skillet. As the first thug rounded the island, raising his weapon, I swung the heavy iron pan with every ounce of strength I possessed. The metal connected with a brutal crack against his jaw. He dropped to the tiles. The second man lunged. I did not hesitate. I grabbed a metal ladle, scooped a generous amount of boiling oil, and flung it across the aisle. The thug screamed, dropping his weapon to claw at his burning face. Dong-Yul stepped past me, disarming the third man with a fluid, terrifying sweep of his leg before dragging me toward the loading dock exit. "Remind me never to complain about your cooking," he breathed, a raw, exhilarated edge to his voice. We burst out into the freezing night air. The armored SUV idled in the alley, the driver throwing the back doors open. Dong-Yul pushed me inside first, shielding my body with his own as a final barrage of gunfire echoed from the kitchen exit. He climbed in after me, slamming the heavy reinforced door shut. The tires screeched against the asphalt as we tore away from the banquet hall. I let out a shaky breath, leaning back against the leather seats. We made it. I turned to look at him, the adrenaline humming through my veins. We need to... The words died in my throat. Dong-Yul slumped back against the seat, his eyes clamped shut, his breathing ragged. In the passing neon light of the city, I saw it. His hand pressed hard against his ribs. Dark, thick crimson blood soaked through the pristine white of his dress shirt, pooling into the dark velvet of his tuxedo. The armored SUV swerved hard off the main road, killing its headlights as it plunged into a narrow, unpaved alley. The driver threw the vehicle in park outside a decaying, brutalist concrete building. A safe house. No marble floors, no crystal chandeliers, just dust, rusted iron, and survival. Dong-Yul leaned forward, his voice strained but commanding. Keep driving. Draw them to the docks. Do not come back for us. The driver nodded, peeling away the second we hit the pavement. I hauled Dong-Yul's heavy frame out of the shadows. My bare feet scraped against the cold concrete as I struggled under his weight, dragging him up the dark stairwell. We collapsed into a dimly lit, barren room. I kicked the deadbolt shut and guided him to a worn leather couch. Do not move, I ordered, my voice trembling but sharp. I found a dust-covered medical box in the corner bathroom. When I returned, Dong-Yul had managed to shrug off the ruined velvet tuxedo jacket. He was struggling with the blood-soaked buttons of his dress shirt. I pushed his hands away, my fingers slipping against the warm crimson staining his skin. I have you, I whispered, tearing the shirt open to expose the wound. The bullet had grazed his ribs. A deep, ugly trench, but it had not shattered bone. I cleaned the blood, my hands shaking. His chest rose and fell in heavy, ragged breaths. Every time I applied pressure, his abdominal muscles went rigid under my fingertips, but he never made a sound. He just watched me. His dark eyes tracked every shift of my face, intense and burning in the dim yellow light. I reached for the needle and surgical thread. This is going to burn. Dong-Yul reached up, his large, calloused hand wrapping around the back of my neck. He pulled me close, forcing me to stop. The heat radiating from his bare chest was intoxicating, an electric contrast to the freezing rundown room. I have endured worse, he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. Focus, chef. I stitched the wound, the proximity forcing our breath to mingle. The raw intimacy of the moment stripped away the titles, the syndicates, and the wealth. He wasn't the feared boss of Seoul, and I wasn't a cartel princess. We were just two bleeding souls hiding in the dark. When I tied the final knot and secured the bandage, I stayed close. The adrenaline crash hit me, making my shoulders sag. You risked your empire for a chef you barely know. You could have died tonight. Dong-Yul's hand slid from my neck down to my bare shoulder, his fingers tangling lightly in the loose strands of my hair. The lethal edge in his eyes softened into a terrifying, consuming obsession. I knew what I was risking, his voice dropped to a rough, breathless whisper. I didn't buy that restaurant because I needed a private cook, Àlàké. I bought it because after one look, I couldn't get your eyes out of my head. The echo of his confession hung in the dusty air, a heavy, electric truth that anchored me to him. I leaned in, the pull between us impossible to fight, my lips mere inches from his. Before we could bridge the final gap, the reinforced steel door of the safe house blew off its hinges. The deafening crack of explosives threw me to the concrete floor. Dust and smoke choked the dim room. Through the ringing in my ears, heavy combat boots crushed the broken wood. Dong-Yul didn't hesitate. Bleeding and half bare, he surged off the worn leather couch, snatching the firearm resting on the low table. Don't! I screamed. I recognized the dark tactical gear entering the room. I recognized the brutal, scarred face of the man leading the strike team. It was my father's lead enforcer. Behind him, half a dozen cartel soldiers fanned out, their rifles leveled at Dong-Yul's chest. Dong-Yul raised his weapon, his jaw set in a lethal line, prepared to pull the trigger and die defending me. I scrambled to my feet, throwing myself in front of him. I pressed my back flush against his warm chest, forcing his weapon down as he could, shielding his wounded body with my own. "Stand down," I commanded. The raw, guttural authority of the Lagos cartel flooded my voice. I didn't sound like a terrified chef hiding in the dark. I sounded like the heir to an empire. "Tell your men to lower their weapons right now. You are looking at the daughter of the king." The tactical lasers swept across the room, bathing my torn crimson gown in bright red dots. The enforcer stopped a few feet away. He did not lower his rifle. Instead, a slow, mocking smile stretched across his scarred face. "You think you still wear the crown, princess?" His thick Nigerian accent dripped with venom. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that chilled my blood faster than the freezing wind pouring through the shattered doorway. "My father will have your head for disrespecting me," I threatened him. I lifted my chin, refusing to let my terror show. "Your father gave the order," the enforcer sneered. He took a deliberate step closer, his eyes shifting to the wounded Korean boss standing behind me. "He did not send us to bring you home, Àlàké. He sent us to deliver you to the man with the gold falcon ring. Your father sold you to the rival syndicate and ordered us to execute anyone standing in the way." The enforcer's laugh grated against the cold concrete walls. He thought he had already won. He thought a daughter sold was a daughter broken. He was wrong. Behind me, I felt Dong-Yul shift. His hand gripped the small of my back, a grounding pressure that told me the game was far from over. "You came for a princess," Dong-Yul's voice rose, a dark velvet promise that echoed through the smoke. "But you found a queen, and you forgot whose kingdom you stepped into." Dong-Yul didn't reach for his weapon. His hand slipped beneath the frame of the worn leather couch, his fingers finding a hidden trigger switch bolted to the wood. He pressed it. The floor didn't give way, but the air did. A wall of high-frequency sound waves ripped through the small room, a localized sonic trap built into the safe house for this exact scenario. The cartel soldiers dropped their rifles, clutching their ears in agony. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed a heavy iron pipe from the debris and swung with every bit of rage I had suppressed for years. I didn't aim for the enforcer's heart, I aimed for his knees. The metal cracked against his joints. He went down. Dong-Yul was a blur of lethal motion beside me, disarming the men before they could blink. The traitor boss, Chairman Bay, was waiting at the extraction point 3 miles away, expecting a delivery. He got a reckoning instead. Dong-Yul made one phone call. His loyalists ambushed the extraction point, dragging Bai out of his car in chains. 1 hour later, the sun began to peek over the Seoul mountains. Dong-Yul stood before me in the ruins of the safe house. He held out his hand. Resting in his palm was the gold falcon ring his men had just stripped from Bai's finger. "Your father's debt is paid, Àlàké," he whispered. "The cartel thinks you are dead. The Seoul syndicate knows you are untouchable. You are free." We dismantled his empire in 10 minutes with a single blood-stained satellite phone and a grudge. Now, the mountain is quiet again. The shattered glass in the kitchen has been replaced with crystal that catches the light. I stand at the marble island, but I'm not wearing a silk gown or a cartel crown. I'm wearing his oversized white dress shirt and my emerald silk apron. I hear his slow, deliberate footsteps on the marble. He doesn't say a word. He just wraps his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder as I stir a pot of jollof rice that fills the estate with the scent of my home and our future. "Is it ready?" he murmurs, his lips grazing the skin of my neck. I turn in his arms, the master of my own kitchen and his heart. It's perfect. The hunt is over. We aren't hiding anymore. We are ruling. Cooking is not just fire and time, it is raw chemistry. I stood in the center of our gleaming kitchen, the Seoul morning sun warming the marble counters. Dong-Yul leaned beside me, wearing simple dark slacks and a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He ruled the underworld. But in this room, he was my student. To build a proper Nigerian jollof, I began, my voice echoing in the quiet space, you cannot rush the foundation. We call it the Obe Ata. I pointed to the roasting pan resting on the stove. Inside sat bright red bell peppers, plum tomatoes, fiery Scotch bonnets, and halved red onions. Most people just blend them raw, I explained, handing him a pair of steel tongs. Turn them. We roast the vegetables first. The intense heat blisters the skin and breaks down the cellular walls inside the produce. This process evaporates the bitter water weight and concentrates the natural sugars, leaving behind a rich caramelized depth. Dong-Yul turned a blistering pepper, his dark eyes focused on the task. Calculated transformation, he murmured. Yes. Once we blend this base and fry it in hot oil, we add the parboiled rice. But the true secret of an authentic party jollof is the smoke. I stepped closer, my shoulder brushing his chest. I guided his hand, pushing a heavy wooden spoon straight down to the bottom of the cast iron pot. The rice scraped against the hot metal. You must let the bottom layer scorch, I whispered, the scent of rich spices and his cedarwood cologne wrapping around me. It triggers the Maillard reaction. The amino acids and sugars in the food crash into each other under high heat, creating hundreds of complex new flavor compounds. That intentional burn at the bottom sends a rich wood-fire smoke up through every single grain of rice. Perfection requires a little destruction. Dong-Yul set the wooden spoon down. He turned his body toward mine, trapping me against the edge of the marble island. The culinary lesson was over. His gaze dropped to my lips, heavy with the heat that rivaled the stove. Perfection requires a little destruction, he repeated, his voice a dark, vibrating rumble in his chest. I like your science, chef. He leaned down, capturing my mouth in a searing, breathless kiss. The underworld outside these walls could wait. Right now, I had an empire to feed.